I recently discovered a recipe that is the beloved national dish of Egypt. It consists of humble ingredients that you probably already have in your pantry. Here are the ingredients. I have 1.5 cup rice. I'm using jasmine here because that's what I have on hand, but the recipe called for a medium grain white rice. You can use whatever you have, including brown rice. I have 1.5 cups dried brown lentils. I have 1 package of elbow macaroni, which equals 2 cups dry. There are lots of different pasta types that you could use here, but traditionally it's made with elbow. I have 1 can of garbanzo beans, which are also called chickpeas, and I'll be using 2 of my 8-ounce cans of tomato sauce. We'll be using this to make a sauce to drizzle over the dish. The original recipe called for a 28-ounce size of tomato sauce, and I'll put a link to the original recipe in the description area of my video, but I was thinking that even if I used half of 1 can for a topping, that's still quite a bit. But you can see how this works out for me and then make a decision for yourself at the end. I'll be using some flour to coat these onions that I'll be frying up. However, I did notice that some recipes had you just frying the onions without the flour. So if you don't have flour, don't worry about it. Also, I'll be using a little vinegar, some ground coriander. If you don't have ground coriander, you can use cumin instead. I noticed that some recipes called for cumin and some called for coriander, and I even found some recipes that called for both. So I haven't decided yet if I'm going to add any cumin or not. If you have fresh garlic, you can use that, but I'll be using powder. And then also to spice up the tomato sauce, I'm going to use some red pepper flakes, and that is completely optional. There are lots of substitutions you can make on this recipe, but I'll let you watch how this works out for me, and then we'll talk about this as we go through it. To start out with, I'm going to cut up this onion. You can use a yellow onion, but I already have this white one, and I'm just going to slice it up in rounds. This dish isn't just the national dish of Egypt, but it's also popular in other Middle Eastern countries. One of the key ingredients in this dish are the fried onions, and we'll be using these as a topping. It gives it a unique and special flavor. I'm going to salt the onions, and then we're going to be coating them with flour. But like I said earlier, some recipes didn't call for this step, so if you don't have flour, it's fine to omit. I read that this is widely sold in street carts in Egypt and also in restaurants. I also had thought I had read somewhere that this was created from the use of leftovers, but then I couldn't find that again. But just looking at these ingredients, I'm imagining that to be true. I want the onions to be fairly dark so that they'll be crispy, but I don't want them to burn. If they do, they'll be bitter. I took a bite of one of these and they are so delicious. I had forgotten how good fried onions are. It has been forever since I've had these, and what a tool they can be in extreme budget eating. I have an emergency meal for less than $1 that I'll show you after this meal that utilizes onions. There are quite a few steps in this recipe, but you could do some of these the day before. I reheated some of the onions in my toaster oven the next day, and they became crispy again, but you do have to watch them closely so they don't burn. The original recipe called for onions in the tomato sauce, but since I'm going to be using the oil left over from frying these onions, it's going to be infused with all of that flavor. I'll just drain it and use that. I'm going to start my lentils cooking, and I'm going to boil these until just past al dente. In fact, I might even take them off right at al dente. And then I'll start my tomato sauce with the oil from the onions. I'm going to add a half teaspoon of ground coriander. And like I said earlier, if you don't have that, just go ahead and use cumin. And I think I will add just a tiny amount of the cumin in. I'm going to add 1/8 of a teaspoon. I'm also going to add a half a teaspoon garlic powder. The original recipe called for chopped garlic, but I don't have that. Plus, it's less expensive with the garlic powder. This is meant to be a spicy sauce, so I'm going to add red pepper, but I'm only adding 1/4 of a teaspoon. And in retrospect, I wish I would have added a little bit more because it wasn't quite spicy enough for me. This is going to be a tomato sauce that's going to help to pull our dish together. We're basically going to drizzle this over our ingredients. So it's going to be a smaller amount that we're going to use. So having it a little spicier than normal is going to be best. And then I'll just add these together, and then I'm going to let it simmer for a good long while and let all of those flavors marry together. And then at the end, I'll add in a little bit of vinegar. The recipe called for 1 to 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, and I was going straight for the 2 tablespoons because I do love acidic sauces, but thankfully I changed my mind because of course you can always add more too, but you can never take out. So I went in with a tablespoon and tasted it, and it was plenty acidic enough for me. My final step is to cook the elbow macaroni. I'm going to cook it in salted water, and I'm going to watch it like a hawk and remove it when it's al dente. This turned out perfect, so I'll be interested to see how well this works in leftovers tomorrow. My rice is done and everything else is complete, so it's time to assemble the ingredients. I found the perfect size container that I'm going to mix the rice and the lentils in. I have a ton of lentils left, but I'm not sure how I feel about adding all of them in. Okay, our dinner has come together, and it doesn't look as big on camera, but this is a huge feast, and I think that this could easily feed 5 people and probably 6. I am starving, so I'm going to dip up my plate. I am anxious to try this. These flavors all work together, and the tomato sauce and onions add so much to the dish. I would have never thought to add all of these ingredients together, but this just works. This is so good, and these ingredients are the type that are filling, that they're going to stick with you. The fried onions on top just sets everything off. They're salty and they're sweet and they're crunchy, so the crunchiness helps to add to the texture of the dish also. Susie Karache, the blogger whose recipe I'm loosely following, likes to serve this dish along with a Mediterranean salad. This just has diced cucumbers, chopped Italian parsley, and tomatoes. And I'm using cherry tomatoes here because that's what I already had on hand. I'm dressing this with a little bit of olive oil and squeezed lemon. I'll also add just a pinch of salt. It always amazes me how refreshing lemon and olive oil are together. I really should dress my salads with this more often. I think this is a perfect side for the richness of the main course, and here they are plated together. I saved this in the fridge for my lunch the next day, and it reheated very well. Even the elbow pasta was fine, and as I said earlier, I was able to make my onions crispy by reheating them in the toaster oven. I tried adding hot sauce to the dish, and that works as a great substitute for the tomato sauce mixture if you want to skip that step. If you don't have vinegar, this is a great option because almost all hot sauces have vinegar as a component. I found lots of different ways that people are plating this, and some people were adding vermicelli and spaghetti to the dish. I think adding in fried vermicelli would add a nice chewy texture. I'm definitely going to try that next time. Thanks so much for watching my recipe video. I'll see you in the next one.